In ancient times, there existed many associations of men and women who were custodians of secret esoteric knowledge. They formed secret societies that protected this knowledge from falling into the hands of the profane, or those who were not properly qualified to have such information. These individuals went through a process of initiation into what are known as the divine mysteries. The divine mysteries were all about having reverence for the powers of nature and of God. These societies created an elaborate theology and many myths and legends that veiled the esoteric knowledge that they possessed. Each initiate was expected to accept the divine powers of mind and will that came with initiation as a responsibility. This responsibility was not to be taken lightly. The masters of the societies taught secret practices and disciplines to the initiates. These were for the purposes of developing what they believed to be potent abilities within each initiate's soul. These abilities would enable the initiate to come into conscious communication with the spiritual realm. The initiates of the mysteries were called twice-born because they were reborn after their initiation, reborn from the womb of the mysteries. They were known as adepts. Adepts were very highly evolved human beings. They studied philosophy, arts, and the sciences. However, studying was not the end goal of the adepts. The true purpose of studying the sacred sciences was to release the human soul from the bondage of the senses. It was considered a great responsibility to receive the light of truth. However, adepts of the mystery schools were opposed by forces that sought to destroy them and their teachings. For this reason, knowledge of the secret teachings had to be occulted or hidden. While in ancient society these groups of individuals operated in the open, later on they had to go underground for protection. This is why it seemed they disappeared from public view. In reality, they developed a whole new way of communicating with one another and keeping the sacred knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. This type of communication was in the form of unusual symbols, myths, and figures that were used to conceal the teachings. Only the initiated, or those with eyes to see and ears to hear, were able to understand the teachings. These ways of veiling information were essential for protecting the wisdom teachings. Symbolism is the language of the mysteries. It is the language of mysticism, philosophy, and nature. This type of communication transcends language and its limitations. This, then, was the way that esoteric, transcendental knowledge was preserved. The wise sages of old wanted to make certain their knowledge would be preserved and concealed. They used mythologies to hide their knowledge of chemistry and mathematics. These mythologies were never meant to be taken literally. The adepts of old concealed knowledge about the mysteries of life within allegories and symbolical figures. They intended for the knowledge to be understood only by the minds of the initiated. From the profane, these truths were hidden. The profane were offered exoteric, literal interpretations about the great truths of nature and the abstract principles of natural law. For them, the vital forces of the universe were personified. They became the gods and goddesses of the ancient mythologies. Those who were ignorant of the esoteric knowledge offered sacrifices to these gods and goddesses, believing they were actual beings. The initiated, however, realized that the marble statues of the gods and goddesses only stood as symbols of great abstract truths. The secrets of the mysteries are metaphysical, philosophical, and esoteric. The adepts studied the human psyche and practiced spiritual disciplines. These prepared the adepts to attain an inner strength and to expand their consciousness. Adeptship is the state of complete spiritual maturity as a human being. Because adepts were highly spiritually evolved, they developed extraordinary faculties and powers. They served as interpreters of the mysteries and dedicated themselves to studying the science of life and the art of living. The body of knowledge they held is known as the esoteric tradition. There were many, many of these ancient cults with branches in all parts of the world, both east and west. The cults of Pythagoras and the Hermeticists were greatly influenced by Eastern philosophy, while the Rosicrucians, for example, took many of their ideas from Arabian mystics. It appears that during ancient times, even the most uncivilized people had mystic rituals and secret practices. The Druidic mysteries originated in Britain and Gaul. The priests of this group were called Druid, which means superior instructor. The subordinate instructors were called Gowid or Ovid. Both of these instructors were known as the Bard or bards, which means teachers of wisdom. The bardic order eventually consisted of three classes: the Druids, the privileged bards, and the Ovates. The word Druid is thought to mean the men of the oak trees. The Druids, or servants of truth, had a very powerful and influential presence in Great Britain and Gaul going back to ancient times. They were considered the patriarchs of society and were believed to act as mediators between the gods and men. The Druids had a deep understanding of nature and her laws. Main areas of expertise for the Druids were geography, physical science, natural theology, and astrology. They also had a fundamental knowledge of medicine and the use of herbs. Eliphas Levi, the famous magician, in his 1860 book, The History of Magic, says this about the Druids. The Druids were priests and physicians, curing by magnetism and charging amulets with their fluidic influence. Their universal remedies were mistletoe and serpent's eggs, because these substances attract the astral light in a special manner. The solemnity with which mistletoe was cut down drew upon this plant the popular confidence and rendered it powerfully magnetic. The progress of magnetism will someday reveal to us the absorbing properties of mistletoe. We shall then understand the secret of these spongy growths which drew the unused virtues of plants and became surcharged with tinctures and savors. Mushrooms, truffles, gall on trees, and the different kinds of mistletoe will be employed with understanding by a medical science, which will be new because it is old, but one must not move quicker than science, which recedes that it may advance the further. Levi also says that the Druids lived in strict abstinence, studied the natural sciences, maintained the deepest secrecy, and only allowed new initiates into the group after long probationary periods. Few of the Druid priests married. Many of them lived as recluses, where they spent time in prayer and meditation, only emerging to perform their religious duties. Ames Freeman Clark, in his book 10 Great Religions, says this about the beliefs of the Druids. They believed in three worlds and in transmigration from one to the other. In a world above this, in which happiness predominated, a world below of misery, and this present state. This transmigration was to punish and reward and also to purify the soul. The Druids believed good and evil are so exactly balanced that man has the utmost freedom and is able to choose or reject either. The Welsh triads tell us there are three objects of metapsychosis: to collect into the soul the properties of all being, to acquire a knowledge of all things, and to get power to conquer evil. In addition, they believe there are three kinds of knowledge: knowledge of the name of each thing, of its cause, and its influence. There are three things which continually grow less: darkness, falsehood, and death, and there are three things which constantly increase: light, life, and truth. Most of the mystery schools divided their teachings into two distinct sections, and the Druids were no exception. One section was a simple moral code which was given to all people. The other section taught the deeper esoteric doctrines and were given only to initiated priests. Becoming initiated was not an easy task. A candidate had to be of exceptional virtue and pass many tests of character. He was not taught any of the secret doctrines until he had successfully passed these tests. Once he had, he was required to take a vow of secrecy. The initiates received instruction on the doctrines of the mystery in places far away from the rest of the people, in forests and in caves. They were taught about the creation of the universe, the personalities of the gods, the laws of nature, the secrets of occult medicine, the mysteries of the celestial bodies, and about magic and sorcery. Both the cross and the serpent were sacred to the Druids. The initiates cut the branches off of oak trees and fashioned them to the trunks to create crosses. Their chief deities were a male and a female, the Great Father and Mother, Hu and Tsarion, which represented the two principles of all being. In addition to the main deity, they worshipped the sun, moon, and stars. Druids also had a great reverence for nature spirits, such as fairies and gnomes. There's a similarity between the beliefs of the mystery schools and of the Druids and of those of Greece and Egypt, in that the Druids taught that Hu, the sun god, was murdered, and after going through a number of mystic ordeals and rituals, was eventually restored to life. To symbolize this, candidates for initiation were buried in a coffin, as symbolic of the death of the sun god. The Druidic mysteries had 3 degrees in all, but very few initiates were able to pass them all. Those who did were referred to as born again, and then instructed in the secret mysteries that the Druid priests had preserved. The most famous of all the Druidic altars is Stonehenge in southwestern England. Stonehenge is one of the wonders of the ancient world, as it is laid out on an astronomical basis, and it still stands to this day. No one knows how the Druids managed to move these massive stones and put them in place. It is still a mystery that has not been explained. Philosophy and all its various schools of thought emerged directly from the religious mystery schools. Philosophy and religion were originally not separate schools of thought. It was not until the decay of the mystery schools that this came about. Eventually, as societies declined in virtue, the mysteries became perverted, and sorcery took the place of divine magic. Those who wanted to preserve the secret teachings had to hide the knowledge. This knowledge was preserved in various ways to ensure that it would not fall into the hands of the uninitiated, or if it did, those receiving it would not understand it. The arts of divination, such as reading tarot cards, are just one example of how occulted knowledge has been preserved.